Thank you for tuning in to Love in Your Hands with Cynthia Clark, the podcast about how to live life with love, passion, and purpose. This podcast is sponsored by loveinyourhands.com, the place to find long-lasting love through the merging of ancient science, modern technology, and quantum physics. Tired of superficial connections? Go to loveinyourhands.com and start your free Aligned to Your Soulmate 5-day challenge, where you could win a $20 Amazon gift card. Now here's your host, Cynthia Clark, certified palm reading consultant, love compatibility coach, author, and speaker. Hi there, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Cynthia Clark, and I am excited to talk about today's topic of writing, which is a really important topic that a lot of people are maybe wondering about, or maybe you've started important topic that a lot of people are maybe wondering about, or maybe you've started your own book, or maybe you just need some help around that area. I like to start every episode with a little palm reading lesson because, of course, that is my specialty. And so there is actually a marker on your hands that relates to writing, and we call it the writer's fork. It is located on a major line in your hands. It's called your headline, which is really easy to find. Okay, so if you look at your hands and you take a look at the middle line, pretty much cutting your hand in half horizontally, it's above your lifeline and below your heart line. So it's like right in the middle of your hand. That is your headline. And at the end of this line, very once in a while, so it certainly doesn't occur all the time, there will be a tiny little fork at the end of this line. So in other words, writer's fork. So if you happen to have this marker in your headline, that's an indication that you have writing in your repertoire, or in your abilities, or in your talents. You can think of it like that. Your hands always reflect things that want to be used in terms of talents. So if you have a writer's fork, you need to think about writing. Now, you may also be wondering, okay, what kind of writing should I be doing? And we'll be talking to our guest about that as well. But in the headline, if you have a pretty straight headline, that would be an indication of you probably should be writing more of a nonfiction, or how-to, or a teaching kind of writing. And if your headline is more curved, in other words, if it heads down towards the bottom of your hand, towards the wrist, chances are you're more imaginative. Your hand towards the wrist, chances are you're more imaginative, because that's the realm of imagination. And you should probably be thinking more in the realm of fiction, or just something more colorful in your writing. So anyway, that is today's palm reading lesson. And I am really excited to bring in our very special guest today. We have Devlin Blake, who is a story sorceress, business book ghostwriter and coach, editor, novelist, published author, and writing coach. Thank you so much for coming on the show today, Devlin. How you doing?
Thank you for having me, Cynthia. And that was fascinating about the writer's line.
Yeah, not too many people know about that one. It's kind of a little lesser known marker in the hands, but definitely something to pay attention to.
Definitely.
So tell us a little bit about you and your background. How did you get into writing?
Well, I always like to tell people I've been writing all my life, because even before I was old enough to actually write words, I used to write pictures in like journals and tell stories about the pictures. So I have always been a writer.
Wow.
And for a long time, I just figured it would just be a dream, because you'd see shows like Murder, She Wrote. Remember that one?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
And they had that Jessica Fletcher character who was a writer. And when you're growing up and watching shows like that, you think you want to be a writer, but that writers, or thought I knew that writers had to live in a certain place and be connected to certain people. And I grew up in a small town off the coast of North Carolina, so it's like, I'm not from a certain place. I don't know any people like that. So I figured I was never actually going to be a real writer. And then Kindle publishing came on the scene. And
Yeah.
that changed everything because we are currently living in the third biggest publishing revolution in all of human history.
That's exciting.
And that means that anyone, no matter where they live or who they are or are not connected to, can actually write and publish a book. And that's exciting because voices who didn't get a voice under the old system can actually be heard now.
Yeah, that's amazing. So people who want to write a book, how should they get started? What should they do?
Well, the first thing they need to do is figure out what kind of book they want to write, obviously. If you want to write a novel, if you want to write a memoir or a biography, which are not the same thing, if you want to write like a book for your business, those are all, of course, different types of books. Now, once you determine which book you're writing, then you need to binge read some books in that genre.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yes, and it's actually very good advice because the thing is, a lot of times people go, well, I don't want to read books in my same genre because A, either they don't really care for that genre that much, or B, they're afraid their book is going to be just like everybody else's book. And those are both mistakes that new writers make because one, you should never write in a genre you don't like, ever. And two, your book can't be like anybody else's book because it's your book.
Right, it's you, it's your voice coming out, it's your personal take on things.
Exactly. And that's never going to be changed regardless of how many books you read.
Yeah, that's very good advice. When I first started getting into palmistry, I probably read 50 or 60 books on palmistry. And it was to learn, of course, what I was trying to teach to other people, but it also gave me a really good background into writing my book, which eventually I did and published in 2017. So yeah, it is important to read other people's books, and it's good to look. Wouldn't you say it's good to look at people's styles and like how books are put together, especially when you're wanting to write a book?
Definitely, because style is everything. Style is most of what takes some book to success and some books to, not success. I don't want to use the word failure, but not success. For example, this is a fiction example, but I always like to use it. Harry Potter is not really an original book. I mean, all those creatures were borrowed from other mythologies. There were stories about child wizards in mythical boarding schools with dark lords long before Harry Potter. Worst Witch was one. There was the Percy Jackson series, Vampire Academy. There were plenty of books like that. Just because there were plenty of books like that didn't mean there couldn't also be Harry Potter.
Right. So there's room for everything out there.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's refreshing to think about. So what else can people learn from other writers? Is there something that they should pay attention to? What would you recommend in that?
Well, in terms of when they read someone else's book?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I always encourage my business book writers, especially, to not just read business books, because that's an easy habit to get into. You're writing a self-help book, you're reading a bunch of self-help books.
True.
And it's easy to think that fiction books offer no value for you because they're fiction books and you're not writing a fiction book. But novels actually have a lot of value to the nonfiction writer because novels show you how to wrap somebody up in your world. They show you how to up in your world. They show you how to create metaphors. They show you how to get readers to bond with characters. Because even though you're writing a nonfiction book, there's still a character in your book, and that character is you.
Yeah.
And if the reader doesn't bond with you, they really don't care about your book.
So would you say that it's really important to be vulnerable in your writing?
Yes, up to a point. I mean, there is a point where vulnerability is taken too far, but you do need to reveal something about yourself because people can't relate to perfect people.
Yeah, that's true. It puts them kind of outside of their league and they can't relate to them.
Exactly. For example, if you wanted to buy a diet book, would you buy a diet book from someone who's never been fat, or would you buy it from someone who lost 100 pounds on this diet?
Definitely the one who lost the weight.
Definitely.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, that's really interesting. That's good. So and I mean the concept of my podcast, Stories in Your Hands, it's all, to me, it's all about the stories. So, no matter what kind of book you're writing or what kind of message you're trying to get out there, it's like you need to have that, bring the story into your work. So how do people create better stories?
Well, that is a good question. And that is one of the reasons I like to call myself the story sorceress, because even if you're writing a nonfiction book, especially if you're writing a nonfiction book, it still has what they call the narrative. And the narrative is the story. And it's actually really similar for a fiction book, because all fictional stories in general are based on a person whose life has changed in the beginning, and then some things happen and they kind of go lower in their life, and then some more things happen and they go even lower, and then by the end of the book they're on top again. That's basically the template for every story.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the same is actually true in a nonfiction book, because that's the story the readers want. They want to hear about how maybe you had, a good life, or maybe you overcame some struggle and then something happened and you got a rock bottom somehow. And they want to see what you did to overcome your rock bottom so they can overcome their own rock bottom.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Exactly.
So,
and it's important to understand that kind of narrative, that is the story you're telling. And the hero of the story is both you and your reader simultaneously, because you have to write it in a way like, Cynthia can do this thing, so I can do this thing.
yeah, exactly. So it's almost like, becoming the accidental teacher. You know what I mean? Like we all go through these different challenges and struggles, and then to be able to share them in a book or in some written form to inspire others, that's really powerful.
It is, because the truth is, and I forgot who said this, but somebody who was not me said this, that you will not live long enough to make all the mistakes you'll need to make in your lifetime, so you have to learn from other people's mistakes.
Yeah, and if you can learn from other people's mistakes and not actually have to go through them yourself,
exactly, that's even better.
Yeah, even better. Makes life a little easier, right?
Yes, definitely.
So we're supposed to learn from each other.
we are supposed to learn from each other. And traditionally, stories have been one of the ways we have learned from each other. Before there was a written language, there were stories. And stories talked about culture, stories talked about values, stories talked about how to hunt, stories talked about everything.
Right. Yeah, I think of mythology, I go back to the hands, and, each of the fingers, for example, is named after a different Roman god. And so then you can go to the story behind that Roman god, and it's like, okay, they all had different characteristics and different ways of expressing, and those stories actually make your hands come alive a little bit more. So I like bringing in some of that mythology.
Now that is fascinating, and mythology is a favorite of mine. Mm-hmm. And of course, mythologies are influenced by cultures.
Absolutely.
Because one of the things that always fascinated in Sumeria, ancient Sumeria, they saw like vengeful, angry gods all the time. That was their gods. And Egypt saw merciful gods. And if you actually look at the physical climate, it makes sense, because the Nile flooded regularly, and Egyptians could plant crops around that, know when the floods were coming, and leave. Whereas Sumeria just flooded any old time it felt like it. It was hard to build a life in Sumeria, and it was a lot easier to build one in Egypt.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, that would totally affect the stories, wouldn't it?
Exactly. So Sumeria saw angry gods and Egypt saw benevolent ones.
Yeah, that's true. So yeah, you look at the mythology and the time period and that sort of thing. Boy, it really does affect a lot of the future generations and how people look at things.
Definitely. And this is something, again, that fiction can teach nonfiction writers, because one of the great things about fiction is you can crawl into multiple people's heads.
That's true.
And if the writer is a good writer, then you're going to get different points of view. And the 2 points of view don't always match, even though they're seeing the same thing.
That's true, because they're coming from their perspective.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, this is great advice. Yeah, I never would have thought to read fiction or writing nonfiction, but that's actually, I have always enjoyed fantasy. So I've read all the Harry Potters.
Love Harry Potter.
Yeah, Harry Potter's great. But yeah, I've gotten into Robert Jordan. I've read all of his series, the Wheel of Time series, and then I've just really enjoyed the fantasy genre, which I don't know, maybe that's where my love of the mythical and the metaphysical stuff, maybe that's where it all comes in from. I never really thought about it that way, but kind of makes sense now that we're talking about it.
Definitely. And fantasy is very important. I mean, the early mythologies were basically fantasies, even though the people weren't really aware of that back then, but they were basically fantasies. And that's why these larger than life stories stayed, because nobody really wanted to hear a story about the hunter that went out and slayed a lion unless it was like a larger than life story with like a mythical type of figure.
Yeah, makes sense. So what's your opinion on editing? And, let's say you get your book going. When do you bring in an editor?
Okay.
When do you bring in an editor?
Okay. I am glad you asked this, because I'm going to say up front, you absolutely 100% need an editor for your book, because the thing about an editor is that you can't edit your own book. I don't even edit my own book, because it's one of the forest for the trees thing. You know what you tried to say, you think you said it, but someone else who has no idea what you're trying to say says, I totally didn't understand what you just said.
Yes.
and that's not something you can actually overcome, even if you're incredibly smart, because science has proven that the smarter you are, actually, the more likely you're going to fall for this, because your brain is like, no, I totally said that. I totally said that.
Right. And when you're really smart, you oftentimes will use the very scientific terminology, and you put it into.
Exactly. That is exactly true.
Yeah.
And okay, so there's two types of, well, there's actually a lot more than two types of editors, but I'm going to break it down to two types of editors.
Okay.
A beta reader can also be called a manuscript evaluator, and basically they go over the story first. Now, this type of person reads it and goes and gives you broad strokes. For example, they go through and say, I don't think this makes sense, or what happened here? That kind of thing. Or I don't get this thing, or didn't you say that already? They basically give you that kind of evaluation. Now, a line editor will go through line by line and pick it apart a little more. This is when you would get a paperback full of digital red ink. And for example, in a novel, they always like to say line editors catch when your character's eyes changed colors.
Wow.
In a nonfiction book, they can catch just as much. And they're like, wait, you said this like 2 chapters ago, or this is the exact opposite of what you said 2 chapters ago.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, so they see all the little details.
Exactly.
And then, yeah, that's awesome.
And then the third person you need to have is a proofreader. People think an editor and a proofreader are the same thing, but they are not. And an editor should never be your proofreader, because a proofreader, you basically need a grammar Nazi. You need someone who goes through and nitpicks the grammar, but they're not really looking at your story. That's why it shouldn't be the same person, because they're like, oh, comma here, that's a confusable, that kind of thing. But they're not really looking at your narrative at all. So they're not checking to see if it makes sense. They're just checking to see if it's grammatically correct.
Yeah, that I definitely needed that for my book.
Yeah, everybody needs that.
Yeah.
They're just checking to see if it's grammatically correct.
Yeah, that I definitely needed that for my book.
Yeah, everybody needs that.
Yeah, everybody does.
Because again, even if you're great at English, you think you put a comma there. And it's like, you didn't put a comma there.
It's so true. And no matter how well you think you write, it's amazing how many mistakes you make.
Oh, yes.
Because yeah, you're as the writer, you're just trying to get the idea out there.
Exactly.
You're trying to convey the story and help people understand your points. And the grammar can really get in the way of your creative flow.
And this is true. And this is why when I talk to my clients about creating their rough draft, I always say, don't worry about the grammar. Don't worry about the spelling. Don't worry if the whole thing see if it makes sense. And don't correct the spelling yet, because here's the thing. You have to read it through to see if it makes sense. And the reason I don't encourage you to correct the spelling or the grammar at this stage is because you might read it and go, this whole chapter needs to be rewritten. So why in the world are you wasting time on spelling and grammar when none of these words are staying?
Exactly. So you can waste a lot of time on all the little details that don't need to be addressed at that stage.
Exactly.
So it sounds to me like you can really help speed up the process too, and just getting a book from starting point to finish point.
Definitely, because most authors who have never written a book before spend years on it, partially because they think they're supposed to, but the other part is if you've never written a book before, it's really a hard thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
But once you've written a few books, like 2 or 3 books, then you realize there's a formula, there's a system. You realize there's a formula, there's a system. It's like you can write these books a whole lot faster. My first book was many years ago. It was only 35,000 words, which is not very long. And I still had to work on the thing for 3 years and rewrite it 5 times from scratch because I had no clue what I was doing. And that was, like I said, many years ago. I know that book did not get published. Don't bother looking for
it. Okay, that was my next question.
Yep, you're not finding that book anymore. But yes, but now I can actually write a book in under a month of 70,000 words. And that's because I've learned the systems and I've learned the formulas and I've learned the tricks that make writing faster.
Wow, that's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
That's incredibly fast. Yeah, I took 2.5 years on my book, and I threw the first manuscript I threw out after a year and a half. And then I took a break for probably 3 or 4 months, and then I picked it up again, and I had a total rewrite, and that took me another year. Oh, it was such a frustrating process. But back then I was trying to do everything myself. And so I'm seeing the value of bringing somebody in at the beginning, just when you have an idea about a book, and just thinking you have a story to share and you have something you want to get out there. So what should people be thinking about in terms of, like, let's say it's their first book, and let's say they do contact you or someone like you. What is the journey of that? And is it, what can they realistically expect?
When you work with finish? I've got a couple of different programs. My most popular program, of course, is from idea to completed book. So what we do at that point is I would take a person who's got nothing but an idea and maybe some pages. We would go over the ideas and pages, develop the idea. And then we would get into the flow of the book, into the outline. I would show them tips for writing faster. We would, make deadlines and basically get them to do their rough draft fast. Then we go back, we revise it. And then at some point we get it edited, we get it proofread, we get it formatted, we get it a cover, and I show them how to publish it on Amazon themselves. Now that last part surprises people because they're like, wait, I thought you were going to publish it. And it's like, I'm not going to publish it because if I publish it, then your rights are tangled with my rights. And nobody likes tangles.
Yeah, that's true. So you want people to have the ownership of the publishing.
Absolutely. Because here's the other thing. Once you learn how to write a book, like really learn how to write a book instead of just stumble into writing a book, then you can repeat the process for all future books.
Right. So do you feel like people should think about that, like have more than one book in them?
Absolutely. Because there's never been an empire built with one book. Not a fiction one and not a nonfiction one either. If you look at people who, actually write books, people like Robert Kiyosaki, people like Tony Robbins, people like Susie Orman, it's like they have a lot more than one book.
Yeah, they do. Yeah,
Gabrielle
for sure.
Bernstein, it's like they all have more than one book.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And as you grow, you're going to have more things to share and more things to get out there.
Exactly. And it's also a question of depth. For example, something you touch on in a book could be something that deserves a whole book in itself.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, absolutely. So that makes sense. So how much time do you think people should give for like just the concept idea, or like how much time do people need to give to each of the phases?
Okay, well, the thing is, the developing process to get the idea, to get the outline, to get it to what I call pre-rough draft, because everyone wants to just start writing the rough draft right away. And it's like, no, to get to pre-rough draft really takes like a month. Because I always like to tell people that I wrote that book, Touch, which is a novel of 70,000 words, in a month, which is true, but I did spend 2 months planning it.
Okay.
So I would always say about a month for the pre-planning. Because the thing is, once you have the pre-planning down, you totally can write your book in about, I would say, 30 to 45 days.
That's pretty good. That's pretty fast.
Definitely. And you want to write that rough draft as fast as possible because now you've got something to revise, and revising is a lot easier than writing.
I agree with that. Totally. It's always easier to revise.
Absolutely.
So what about traditional publishers? Do you feel like they are obsolete?
I do think that future traditional publishers are going to exist in the same form as we know them today. Because the thing is that I've been noticing is that you can actually hit it just as big indie publishing, but you can't really get the movie rights that way. For example, 50 Shades of Grey was indie published first. So was The Meg, so was Wool, so was The Martian. Now, none of those books became movies until after they got traditional publishers, but that's not to say they weren't hugely popular. They sold millions of copies as indies. So, and because they sold millions of copies, traditional publishers went to those authors and said, please sign on with us. Please let us be in charge of your book and we can make you an even bigger star.
Right. But yeah, getting into a publishing house as a first-time author is incredibly challenging.
Yes, it's true. And I'm not sure they even take first-time authors so much anymore because from a business standpoint, it wouldn't make a lot of sense. The average publishing house, because, they hire people like editors, proofreaders, and cover designers. They have them all in-house. They're employees. They're not contractors. And, to pay for all these people and everything, they need to sell like 1 million books. If your book isn't going to sell 1 million books, they're really not interested.
Yeah, makes sense.
Now, and people are like, yeah, but my book is different. My book could sell 1 million books. And it's like, well, maybe it can. But if you're a first-time author with no proof under your belt, and that's the thing they want proof to show people are interested in either you or your book. That's why celebrities get book deals. but they want this proof, and they're not going to go with an unknown author when they can just scoop up a popular indie, or celebrity. It's a lot less work on their part.
Right. And they know they're going to make money.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, because they're not interested in trying to get an unknown known. They're interested in getting a known super famous. That's a difference.
Exactly. So yeah, so if you're a first-time writer, it just makes a lot more sense to publish yourself and start from that level and build it up that way.
Exactly.
And there's reasons to publish too, besides selling the book itself. Wouldn't you say there's other reasons to actually publish a book?
Oh, definitely, especially a nonfiction book, because that helps build your business. That helps brand you as an expert. For example, if you were up for a speaking gig against and you didn't, the venue operator there is probably going to go with the person with a book because that looks more credible.
Yeah, absolutely. It automatically gives you that credibility that writing a book takes some effort and publishing it, even if you self-publish it, takes some effort.
So. Exactly. And the thing is that it is more impressive. People are never going to be impressed with a zillion articles online as they're going to be with one book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true.
Let's say you have a website that has 2,000 articles on it that you wrote, all yourself, and it, people will be like, that's nice. But you tell them you've got a book pretty much with the same articles in it, and they'll be like, that's impressive.
Exactly. Yeah, it's so interesting when you think about the perception. And yeah, your book doesn't even have super amazing. It can be a good book, and you can still get that benefit. So,
definitely.
Yeah. So
because for nonfiction writers, there's even more ways to make money with your book, not just with speaking gigs, but also it helps you get media attention, because the media kind of likes to know who you are before they get you on their show, because they want to make sure their viewers are going to like you, so they can skim your book or have their assistant skim your book and go, okay, she's right for the show.
Exactly. So let's say you've had a book out for a few years and you're thinking it needs maybe it hasn't been all that successful, or maybe you just haven't done very much with it. Would you recommend that somebody start a new book, or would you recommend they think about maybe doing a polishing of their original book?
Well, there's two places I would start with a book. Well, there's two places I would start with a book like that. And of course, I am not a marketing expert, but there are two places I would start with a book like that. And that is with the cover and the keywords. Okay. And possibly the title, which is part of the cover. Because here's the thing. People think Amazon is a bookstore. And, like all the mysteries would go together. Amazon is not a bookstore. Does not put all the mysteries together. Amazon is a search engine. And like any search engine, it's looking for actual words. And if you don't know the words Amazon's using, and if you don't know the words your readers are using, they're just flat out not going to find your book.
Okay, that's an interesting way to think about it.
Well, it is a search engine. It's a friend of mine who does SEO tells me it's an A9 search engine, but I don't understand search engines enough to know what A9 versus anything else means, but that's what it is. A9 search engine.
Okay.
And the other thing I would do is look at the cover, because covers are where a lot of people mess up when they publish their own book. Because the thing about a cover is you want a cover that both blends in and stands out. And what that means is, if you're writing, I'm just going to say fantasy because this genre has such a specific cover. If you're writing a fantasy with a strong woman, then she's probably going to be a woman on the cover with a castle in the background or a forest and surrounded by pinks and purples. That is the style for fantasy with strong women right now. And you can deviate from this, but the thing is, readers are not going to be as attracted to your book because they expect a book to look a certain way. Okay. For example, a diet book has a picture of a recipe or someone in the kitchen with a bunch of ingredients. That's what a diet book has, a recipe book.
Right.
If you're looking for a science book, that's usually a very clean, white looking cover with a nice font and maybe a single food like an apple.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was picturing for that.
Exactly.
Okay.
So it does matter. People totally judge books by their cover. Another example of that is like cozy mysteries versus thrillers. Thrillers have very dark, gritty feel on their covers. Cozy mysteries are usually done in cartoons. And that tells people, oh, this is a light book or this is a serious book.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, this is really interesting. So yeah, I like that. So, and I would also recommend that people get help with the cover. So not doing like hire some graphic designer to help with the cover, because
Absolutely.
because they can come up with some really awesome ideas that you wouldn't even think of.
This is true.
Yeah.
And a lot of, and a cover designer. Cover designers know genres.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, absolutely.
Because a graphic designer can make something look cool, but if they're not familiar enough with the genre, it's not going to match everything else in the genre. And then people are going to go, that book looks weird.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's not really a benefit.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, they got to know. Yeah, just like we were talking about cookbooks versus fantasy versus horror. It's really important to know who is your audience and what are you trying to get out there.
Exactly. Another good place to get covers, of course, always get a custom cover if you can. But if you can't, there are actually sites out there that have popped up, after Amazon started its publishing thing, where you can buy what they call a pre-made cover. These are where artists basically make covers they like, put them on the site, and you're buying them. But they only sell them once. So after you buy it, nobody else is buying that cover. So now it's your cover. Once. So after you buy it, nobody else is buying that cover. So now it's your cover.
Interesting. Boy, there's just so many options out there.
There really are. Yeah, it's a great time to be a writer because we are living through the greatest writing revolution in history.
Yay, I love that. So, so tell me, how do people work with you and how do they reach you?
Okay. Well, people can reach me at my Facebook page. And that would be Devlin Blake. And of course, I'm going to just give you my email, which is devlinblakehorror@gmail.com. And my website is devlinblake.com. And I am working on a special freebie right now, 6 simple steps to start writing your book.
I love that.
Yeah, that would be devlinblake.com.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for this really interesting conversation. And you've definitely inspired me to start thinking about my next book. So thank you for that. And thanks everybody for tuning in. You know that we really value your input and, what do you want us to talk about? We're here for you. So remember that you can live the life you want regardless of your story. So get out there and write it and have a fantastic day. Thank you for listening to Love in Your Hands. Please rate, review, and subscribe to show your support. This podcast is sponsored by loveinyourhands.com, the place to find and keep long-lasting love. Start your free Soulmate Connection membership today using the most innovative partners, all at loveinyourhands.com.